Good afternoon. This is Glenn Maurer, and I'm here today on the next step. Bud Booth is back in D.C. as we record this show, attending to the U.S. Supreme Court hearing on Dennis Apple's appeal that we did a show about a while back. And we wish a great trip for Bud and hope to see him back here in the new year. Today we have as a guest Nicholas Beeson, and he and I are going to talk about the program, the LA, boy, that's back a decade. The Santa Barbara County Jail, the Santa Barbara County Mental Health System, some of their failures, and some of the needs. If you have a comment that you think we should consider on the next step, or on this show in particular, or something else, you can contact me at my email address, which will be on the screen on occasion. And if you want to watch this show again, if you're catching it live on the television and you want to see it again, or if you don't have access to the television normally, you can go to Ustream, The Next Step, TVSB. If you Google search that, you will find this show and a whole bunch of other shows that we've done. So Nick Beeson is a spokesperson and an activist with I'm confused because you were with a group called Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, CLEW.
That's correct. I did a report with CLEW.
And you also have the title on the screen, Families Act.
Families Act. I am a board member with Families Act.
And tell us a little bit about what Families Act are, just a short, so we can get some context here.
So Families Act is comprised primarily of people whose family members have gotten caught in what we call the revolving door, going from addiction to jail to homelessness, sometimes hospitalization in there, and just cycling through. And it was started by some mothers who lost their children, their young adult children. And I was asked to join. It isn't something that has necessarily affected my family yet, knock on wood, but statistically in the United States, I mean, we're looking at anywhere, the estimates are from 1 in 5 adults to 1 in 4 adults suffer in any given year from mental illness.
Right.
And so it's certainly likely that it could hit anybody. And it's an area that, as a former public defender, I was certainly interested in.
Well, I was going to mention that, and I'll get into that, because Nick, like myself, has a history in public defender service in Ventura County and Santa Barbara County after I left in Santa Barbara County, although we did touch briefly, as I recall. But Nicholas has also done private practice in the community. Is that correctly?
That's correct.
And are you still practicing as an attorney?
Not really. I've still got an active license, but not practicing.
Well, this report that he referred to, that Nick referred to, touches upon a subject that I have for 40 years been bothered by, and the report by CLEW called why are we still taking people with mental illness to jail who don't belong there? It's such an obvious question and such an obvious answer, but the fact is the matter, we have been doing that for decades. And I think historically we can take a little bit of context on this, back up a bit. Back in the 60s, when I was just beginning in my public defender career, there was a reform that came into being called the Lanterman-Petra-Short Act. Lanterman-Petra-Short, LPS for short, and 5150 are sections of the code that people began to learn the phrase for, were enacted. And the idea was that this was going to be a wonderful reform in which people who had severe mental health problems, who couldn't care for themselves or were a danger to themselves or were a danger to others, would be taken out of institutions like Camarillo State Hospital, which is the one most close by here, or Atascadero, and taken out of those institutions which had developed a certain infamy, and put into community care treatment facilities where they would receive outpatient care if possible, state-of-the-art medical and physical attention, and psychological counseling. Well, by the 5 or 6 years after that, funding failed. The funding that was promised to make LPS work as an outpatient, non-institutional system failed. And there were those like myself, and I know it's easy to say this, but I told them so. I just knew that these one of these bargains between liberals and conservatives where I think too often the conservatives win because the liberals imagine that they're going to keep up a fair deal in the future. The deal was to get rid of lot care facilities, which the liberals wanted, and save money by not having to spend them on the institutions and help people out and spend a little bit more money helping people in the community. And of course, the money was taken away, and we ended up with, to make a story short, Ronald Reagan is blamed for this, but it wasn't Reagan. It was the Democrats, the Republicans. It was consensus. Anyway, we ended up with more and more mentally ill people on the streets. And the only institutions that were then available for the really desperate mentally ill, if I might say that, became the jails.
Well, that's precisely the point. And the sad thing is that, as public defenders, we have a natural inclination to want to have people not being incarcerated or held against their will. That's just kind of a fundamental quality that we possess.
Liberty.
We come in with the idea, let's let people free. So the idea that we were going to deinstitutionalize a number of people and put them into community treatment that would be humane, more humane than what those facilities were, not a horrible idea. Certainly some of those facilities were run very improperly. And so, when I think of the problem, you're right. We blame Ronald Reagan kind of as a general default position. But the truth is, and Clue likes to look at things in this sort of a perspective, which is we're all responsible.
Absolutely.
Whether it's those of us who don't speak up loud enough to fight for better treatment early on, and I think a lot of us fall into that category, or those that think that the current system is fine and maybe we should even keep going in the same direction. And so it really is a community issue that we all should be aware of and take interest in, because it could affect any one of our families. That's one of the things I found in doing this report for Clue. And again, I don't know if we stated, Clue stands for Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. That's the local organization in Santa Barbara, fights for those kinds of people that have been marginalized and speaks up for those that don't really have a voice. And so, they're with a number of organizations like Families Act.
I imagine the people could go online and locate these organizations.
Absolutely. Families Act is at familiesact.org. And Clue is, I think when you go to the website, you get the Los Angeles affiliate, but it's a similar sort of...
Well, if somebody's interested, again, go to my email address,
Yes.
which is on the screen. I'll put you in contact with Nick, and we help you pursue a relationship or contact with them for assistance or help, or if you want to volunteer with them. But going back to the nitty-gritty really stuff, when I came to Santa Barbara, I was stunned to find that the Santa Barbara County mental health system lot care facility consisted of 16 beds in a little auxiliary building off by the county jail called the Psychiatric Health Facility, euphemistically named Puff, which I really am offended by that name because it seems to me it always diminished. This is like, oh, Puff, it's just nothing, just a little, whatever. Whatever, it was 16 people, and as public defender of the county, I tried for decades to get the mental health system to expand from every mental health director I worked with from the 70s on. They refused to expand, and they always said different excuses. One is, well, if we go more than 16 beds, we have to have a different kind of licensure, or, we can't build it because there's nobody in the North County that will build it, or we can't have another facility. And so we, as public defenders, were having locked clients who were being held 4,000 miles away from Santa Barbara County under conservatorships and other things, but also they were being put into the county jail. People who would never have gone to the county jail because for the quote-unquote crime they allegedly had committed and clearly belonged in psychiatric care were too violent, too active to be quote-unquote just ignored, breaking windows up and down State Street. I remember one client in particular who saw the devil in the glass and that kind of thing. So they ended up being put in the Santa Barbara County Jail, and then over time, this is my opinion, but over time the jail realized they could expand their empire. They could make their system bigger if they had more population.
Yeah, and in doing this report, and we'll talk more about the numbers in a minute, I found a lot of really good people within the jail, and it's kind of a sad situation that they are being charged with this, and I think there is some of what you're saying, that desire to expand, but I don't know that it's on a conscious level, in like, well, we just want to expand our power, as much as just an incremental, well, we need this, and then it grows, and then we need this, and it grows. And so we see a lot of that, and then there's not the countervailing voices that say, wait a second, we have a cheaper way that's more effective to treat these people more humanely. And so it really is a great issue for all.
Well, let me just back down to some fundamentals.
Yes.
I think you're right. The Santa Barbara County Jail is expanding, and they're building a new facility in the North County of several hundred beds. In the Santa Barbara County Jail at any given time, by their own standards, there's about 20% of the population, and maybe up as much as 40% of the population of that jail that needs mental health care and is or getting mental health care under their programs.
Correct. And actually, we'll talk about those numbers because there's some great reports that were done previous to what we did. And we really just reviewed a lot of these reports, talked to people that are currently working within the system to try to get, an idea of where we are today. But going back to that PUF unit, and I agree, it's a poor acronym because it stands for Psychiatric Health Facility, PHF. We call it PUF. Everybody within the system does.
Well, I did.
When you were in the system, there were 16 beds. Guess how many there are
16.
Today? 16 to this date.
Yeah,
even though
expand.
We've had this expansion of population,
right.
There's a desperate need. I talked to people in the jail. They have 4 padded cells in our main jail here in Santa Barbara. There are times when somebody who is in desperate need of being in the PUF facility has to wait up to 8 days.
Right.
Now, they claim that it's starting to come down a little bit, but we still are, left with people that are suicidal, in desperate need of being brought to the psychiatric health facility, which is an intensive care facility where a person who is a danger to themselves or others can be brought at the request of a family member or other people within the community to be treated more humanely. And so one of the very first things we absolutely have to do is expand those beds.
Right, and I understand there's potential for doing that in North County in the new hospital up there. But what bothers me is the refusal of the county to hold the sheriff and the director of the mental health system to this task, this common task, and say to them, you get together and instead of building 350 jail beds,
so
why don't we build 50 less prison cells and 100 care facility beds in the North and South County, something like that.
Well, so that's the title of our report kind of evolved, and it is now, why are we still taking people with mental illness to jail who don't belong there?
Right.
It's a very simple question. But the truth is, what we learned, the numbers we were given were there's approximately in our jail, our Santa Barbara main jail, every day 200 people that have mental illness.
Right.
Of those, about 75% were estimated to be non-dangerous, low risk. Right. I think we should all start from the proposition that there are some people who are dangerous.
We all agree with that.
Who have committed certain crimes that we don't want out of jail, and we'll let the system work its way. Somebody could be found not guilty by reason of insanity.
But practically and pragmatically, from your experience, and I know from my experience, and the audience knows also that there are people with mental health problems that do things technically illegal that would never be brought into a jail if there was an alternative.
Absolutely, and that's the dilemma we're trying to get at. So of the 200 people per day that was estimated, I think it's a little bit more, there was estimated to be 75% who were low risk, non-dangerous. Right. They were in for things like disturbing the peace.
Substance abuse.
Petty theft, substance abuse.
Alcohol, marijuana, other drugs.
All those sorts of things. And, small, low-level crimes, not dangerous.
Right.
If we had healthcare facilities that could handle these people, that's where they would likely be taken. But because we don't, our jails have become the de facto mental institution in the county. And so what we wanted to know was how many. So if you take 75% of 200, you have about 150 per day that are low risk. They really don't belong there. And the question is, why aren't they being taken somewhere else? And the gist of the answer is, we don't have enough treatment options in the community. And so then the next question is, well, what can we do about that? One of the first things you want to do, and this is why this issue transcends politics, because if you're a fiscal conservative or somebody who cares about human beings being treated with dignity and decently, because it could be any one of our family members, given the numbers. Why don't we look for the smarter option, the one that works better in the long term and is less expensive? So we started looking at the numbers. And if I can just give a little historical background of what our county has done. So in 2008, there was a report. We found the Sheriff's Department had a blue ribbon commission on jail overcrowding. And they submitted their report to the County Board of Supervisors, and they said, quote, although it has become the county's de facto mental institution, the jail is not an appropriate place for most people with mental illness. Finding alternatives to incarceration for certain people who are mentally ill is cost-effective and provides more effective treatment. These strategies may also reduce recidivism rates and therefore the need for jail beds. Now, that came out in February of 2008.
Right.
No major action taken.
Right.
Then we get a second report in from the 2010-2011 Santa Barbara County Grand Jury. They submitted a report to the Board of Supervisors on May 26, 2011. Their report was entitled Homeless Mentally Ill Indigent Recidivism. This recycling is not good for the county. And what they were looking at people that were homeless and mentally ill going to jail. They said the cost in human suffering is obvious, but there is a monetary cost to the community as well. The jury believes the cost of jailing and tending to the medical needs of these individuals on an ad hoc, recurring basis is greater than the cost of a planned and sustained effort that addresses their problems at the outset. So what happened in response to this? The County Board of Supervisors asked the county CEO to look into what the costs were. So they did a fairly quick report because they only gave them 4 months to do this study. And what they found was to house and treat people in jail, right, with both medical care, mental health care, and the facilities, food costs, all of that, cost us $52,872 per person per year. To do the treatment outside, they used the highest estimate they came up with, which was $11,400 for housing and $18,600 for the mental health treatment component and $3,500 for medical care treatment for these folks. And that total was $33,500. So when you subtract it out, it's $19,372 more to keep somebody in jail with mental illness than to treat them in the community, house them, and give them medical care.
And a bad outcome versus a good outcome.
Exactly right. We're going to end up with these same folks coming through. And Glenn, it's not just a situation that's affecting Santa Barbara County. It really affects the nation. If I can't,
let me just. We haven't. This could be a 4-hour program. I think.
You bet.
Let me move on to this other issue. What frustrates me, and has frustrated me for all these years that I mentioned, is that these facts are known. They're not controverted.
Correct.
Everybody knows this, and everybody can see it. But yet we spend money in the county lobbying to build new jails, and building new expensive jails, versus relatively inexpensive block care facilities, if that would be a compromise, versus quite inexpensive clinical type of facilities relative to a jail in terms of providing care. Why can't we get folks like you are lobbying for a humane answer. The Board of Supervisors ostensibly is supposed to care, is supposed to be a moderately progressive, enlightened Board of Supervisors, but we still, in the 30 years, last 25 years anyway, the sheriff has campaigned for a North County jail for decade after decade after decade. It's a holy grail in their world. and they're going to get it. Even though they don't have the money for it, even to this day, they're still spending money to develop it. Why can't we get some of that money diverted into better facilities that will do humane things?
Well, I'm an optimist. I think we can.
Good.
And while it's true that there is kind of a momentum that is certainly built up with the sheriff's effort to build a new North County jail.
That momentum has been backed up numerous times, but they keep restarting.
Exactly. I mean, well, we had a vote in the county.
Right.
Let me point out something about the Blue Ribbon Commission on Overcrowding. They said in their report in 2008 that unless you raise the sales tax and or property taxes or both,
Right.
there will not be enough funds to run the new North County jail. It will cost the county an approximately, and this was the estimate back a while ago, so I'm sure it should be adjusted upward now, but in 2008 it was $17,500,000 per year from day one that they would have to come up with. And the Blue Ribbon Commission said, if you don't do those things, then you're going to have to cut services in other areas, and we don't recommend that. But what happened? So there's Measure S a couple years ago in 2010. The county electorate says, no, let's not do this. Let's not raise the taxes to fund a new jail. And yet we still go forward with it when we have better options that are cheaper.
So you and I are saying the same thing.
Exactly.
And it's frustrating. Why and how can we get the Board of Supervisors to comply with the expressed will of the public, number one? Number two, what about the money that's come in from Prop 63 and the tax assessment for the mental health care that was passed a couple years ago, and there was supposed to be millions of dollars generated on a surcharge on income taxes and other forms of money to be used instead of being used for administration and ADMS and I know. AEMS in Santa Barbara County has been a scandal for a long time.
Well, and here's why I'm optimistic about that. So ADMS underwent an evaluation from an outside organization called Tri-West. We found there to be really great momentum taking place at ADMHS. So we're enthusiastic. There's some really good people working to try to get some changes within the system. But you're still dealing with the reality of, you've got limited resources. Are you going to spend them on jails or not? So
well, they don't have the money to spend them on jails. They didn't get the tax. They didn't get the other money. They do have money coming in from Prop 63, which is supposed to be used for health care services, mental health services, and yet I don't know where that money is going.
Yeah.
So why is this money being sucked into the black hole of a new jail instead of being built with some actual facilities where people can get care?
We think that the fact that ADMHS was really dysfunctional at the time, that was the finding of Tri-West, which did the evaluation, left a void in a counterbalance in the argument. And so we're advocating in our report that the county engage an outside analyst to look at how our money is spent and to reevaluate the need for this. It's now 604 beds that they're proposing for the North County.
Right.
Now, being from Santa Maria and being a public defender who's sometimes dealt with people in Santa Maria, it would be nice to have some facility there that we can all go to and meet with our clients and families could meet and stuff. So I'm not saying there isn't
I don't think anybody is objecting to
some
balance between incarceration, but it's all going toward incarceration. And it's all going toward building institutions that cost a huge amount of money to administer. I don't think you touched on it, but the public doesn't get this. To run a jail, to build a jail is expensive.
Correct.
Because they have standards and building rules. But to run it is grotesquely more expensive. And it's a long-term permanent obligation. And we are being sucked into that time and time again by the sheriff and I guess the prison guards unions and other institutions that see an advantage for themselves. And it's not good for the actual physical, emotional, or psychiatric health of this community that we do that. Yeah. That's my speech. And I've been trying to say this for 40 years. People need to be given mental health care and not in a jail which is not designed for that purpose, doesn't really care about doing that purpose, doesn't have the proper protocol for doing that, and can't follow up on it when the person's discharged. Right. We have to build something better.
And the people on the ground floor of that have to deal with that in the jail, they don't want it either. That's not that what they're...
Well, what will they give up in order not to have it?
Well, I think that's why we need to have our board really revisit this whole expenditure, because you're right. It's ineffective. We're wasting money, and we're doing harm to people. You know, I analogize it to cancer. If we had people that had, you know, levels of cancer and could not find treatment in our community,
right,
we would move heaven and earth to make sure that we did that, because we all understand that could be us, it could be our loved ones, and we would do things to accommodate the proper treatment. We would never say, well, gosh, we don't have anywhere else to take them, let's take them to jail. Right. Well, it's inhumane, because mental illness is just that. It's an illness.
You and I have an advantage, I might say, in that sense, doing public defender work. We saw people as people, clients as people, criminals as people, and they were good and bad and all over the place in between. But basically, they weren't that much different than the people who were outside of their scope. I mean, some of them deserved punishment, some of them were difficult, but others were mentally ill and had other kinds of problems that were completely understandable and sympathetic if you got to know them, and if you understood their context. But the people who are advocating for the jail are much more able to scare folks, and fear is the great motivator of any social policy. And they're saying if we don't build jails, people will be free to go about the community and to do these horrible things, because these are real criminals we'll be leaving out, and they don't stop and look at the kind of quote-unquote criminal behavior that the folks engaged in. So the lobby is stronger on the jail side in terms of fearing the fear. But even that, they didn't vote for the sales tax increase.
No, absolutely not. Now, I want to cite a recent poll, August 28th, 2013. 1,600 California voters from across the state were asked certain things about reform with our criminal justice system, because we are spending so much on it. One of the questions was, would you support or oppose expanding effective treatment programs for mentally ill people instead of putting these people in prison, right? More serious crimes for prison. 80% of the 1,600 people that were surveyed, and this was a cross-section, 80% support, you know, giving treatment to people.
Okay. And they voted for Prop 63. A majority of people voted to tax, to spend money for this type of care. And it's not happening, Nick.
So we as a community, the people like yourself and myself and people that are listening, have to get out there and get their voices heard. We're going to be submitting this report probably in January. We need to meet with the supervisors. We want to inform them of what our findings were, remind them of things they've been reminded of in the past, but maybe didn't spend enough time focusing on, and hopefully get a little bit of a reassessment of where we are and where we need to go.
And hopefully get the public in there, besides just the people who are immediately affected by it. You know, Nicholas, you know, I understand if you've got a family member that's been involved in this, you're more motivated. But as just ordinary citizens and taxpayers, we should care. I mentioned before, if you want to get a hold of Nicholas, you can contact me at my email address, and I'll pass it on to him, and he'll be in touch with you. Thanks to the crew, Ali and Juanita and Liz, for manning the machines back there that keep this going. And we'll see you in a while.